Welcome to T21 Mom. Hi, friends, and welcome back to the T21 Mom podcast after a brief summer hiatus. I hope you all have been having a fantastic summer. I'm Mary, mom to Ainsley, who has the dual diagnosis of Down syndrome and autism, and I am living life my way. And this is episode 134. On today's episode, we are continuing with the Down syndrome diaries and sharing diagnosis stories. But this episode has a bit of a unique twist. It's the first time ever that I have spoken with both a husband and wife. I love chatting with John and Nicole Vester. They were so much fun, and I really enjoyed their diagnosis story and them sharing their love for each other. Let's go have a listen. We got some applause there. And today on the T21 Mom podcast, the Down syndrome diaries continue. And today I'm chatting with John and Nicole Vester. Welcome.
Thank you. I wanted to say thank you for having us today on the podcast. We are so excited to tell our story, but I just want to thank you so much. It means so much to us to be able to tell our story on your podcast, because when I found your podcast, I was like, oh my gosh, no way, there is one just for me. Like, I'm a T21 mom, and, you know, having a child with special needs it can be, what is the word I'm looking for? It can be a little bit
hard, isolating, challenging.
No, isolating. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to?
I thought that was the word you were actually looking for, but I thought it might be something else, so I wasn't going to say it, but thank you. I appreciate that. And I love hearing from people who have listened to the podcast and that they get something out of it, because, you know, it's like a labor of love for me. I love doing it. But it's getting harder, you know, trying to think of new ideas and different episodes and stuff. But then I love sharing these diagnosis stories, and people have been really wanting to share their stories, which I think is really lovely. And it's nice that we have, you know, a husband and wife on today, because I don't think that's ever, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't think that's ever happened, actually. So this is a first. And thank you, John, for the sound effects. It's awesome. So, you know, before we get into your diagnosis story, do you want to share a little bit about the two of you?
Yeah, I'll share a little bit about us. John and I was 40 and he was 46 when we met. We met on Match.com, and we had prior marriages. So he has a boy who is now 25, turning 25, and I have a girl who just turned 23. So we have mine, his, and we have ours. And we have Finney, who is 6, and he has a diagnosis of Down syndrome, a splash of autism, and apraxia.
Wow.
Apraxia of speech.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I've heard it's more common in our kids. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
We live in Zionsville, Indiana, which is a suburb near Indianapolis, Indiana. You might heard of that. Indianapolis is the racing capital of the world. That's how we're known here. And my daughter went to Zionsville schools her whole childhood and graduated, and we just chose to stay in Zionsville because it's a really good school. And we thought that it would be good for Finney to stay in a really good school system because of his Down syndrome. So that is where we're from. And yeah, that's where we are right now.
Awesome. So, as I said, I've been sharing diagnosis stories on the podcast, and I found your story quite interesting because, John, you obviously enjoy blogging, and you were blogging like about Nicole's pregnancy right from the beginning. So, I mean, obviously you were blogging, but why did you decide to share about this or blog about this?
Well, so it goes back to the first date that we had was on Match.com. We were each other's first date. And there's
Wow.
things you're not supposed to do on the first date. And one of those is like, talk about having kids. And that's exactly what we did, which was kind of funny because the reason why we talked about it is we both, like Nicole mentioned, we have a child each. And the thing that we both realize is how quick that goes, right? How fast that whole era just zooms by.
Hmm.
We're like, wow, yeah, having one more kid would be awesome. Even though we were, both in our 40s, I was closer to 50 at the time, but we were still wanted to do that. And so when we started trying, we kind of wanted to have a record of it. I enjoy writing. I do a lot of
Hmm.
freelance writing, and so it kind of felt natural just to put down my thoughts and our experiences into a place where we could like, read it again later or share with others.
That's fantastic to have a nice, something to go back on, to, to go through those memories, like even years later, right? I think that's wonderful. And interesting, you had mentioned that prior to getting pregnant, I think it was, that you saw the movie To Joy with Love. Now, I haven't seen this movie, but I'm familiar with the story. And I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the story, but do you want to share a little bit about what the movie is about?
Well, it's a heart-wrenching and inspiring movie based on a true story. It tells the story of Joey and Rory Feek. It focuses on the trials the couple goes through when Joey, Rory's wife, she has a baby with Down syndrome, and then later she fights cancer. Yeah, the movie is basically like snippets of little home movies that Rory has taken. And the way it ends is really sad because she doesn't make it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we saw the movie and we walked out and I was like, John, let's have a baby. And he was like, okay. Like the movie just inspired us. Like we had talked about having a baby, but the movie just it moved us to be like, we have this kind of love. Let's share it. So, and ironically, their baby was born with Down syndrome also. I didn't say in the beginning when I was talking about us, but I think it's important, maybe just relevant, that I got pregnant. We got married in 2015. I got pregnant in 2016, like later, like November. I was 43 and John was 49. So when Finney was born, I was older.
Mm-hmm. I was in the exact same boat as you, same age. So I totally understand. So looking back, do you think that movie was kind of, in some ways, prophetic, but also foreshadowing a bit of what was to come?
Yeah, especially whenever, they named their child Indiana and we're living in Indiana. That's kind of crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that's happened during that time, we were still in the plugged in to the cable box days, and there was a show called Born This Way,
Mm-hmm.
and it was about kids that were born with an extra chromosome. And we couldn't stop watching it. And we don't know why, but we just loved it. And we like, you became part of that family where you're watching and
Mm-hmm.
you're laughing with them. You're like, feeling the pain that the struggles that they're going through at the same time. And like we never really kind of realized that, but I felt like it was a way that we were getting prepared for our future without us actually realizing it.
Oh, that's so cool that you guys were watching that show because I loved that show.
Yeah.
But I had a child with Down
And
syndrome, but you guys were watching it without having a child with Down syndrome. So that's so nice to hear that people were watching it that don't have really any direct association to someone with Down syndrome.
Yeah, I had never been around or known anyone with really any special needs at all. I went to a small school in a small town and I just found it really it was inspiring. I was like, these people have normal lives. They're typical. They have normal feelings. They go through the same things that we do, and they have the same wants and the same desires. And I just loved it, and I just couldn't wait to watch it every week.
Oh, that's so fantastic. Yeah, it's too bad that it's not still on. I would love to sort of see where they're all at now because it's been a couple of years. But yeah, what a lovely show. And you're right. Like just to see that they're just living ordinary lives like the rest of us and have the same feelings and emotions and wants that all of us have, like being in a relationship, being in love, having a job, all of those things. So that's so cool that that was sort of all part of your lead up to your baby Finn. Now, you mentioned that it took a few months to finally get pregnant. And when you went to the first appointment, Nicole, you were just shy of 8 weeks. And what did they find out at that appointment?
Well, at the first appointment, we found out that we had twins. And
Wow.
I'm an identical twin.
Hmm.
So I wasn't surprised. And my twin sister was texting John play by play. I think like she knew, she just, for some reason, she wanted to know was there twins.
Hmm.
And I hadn't even been thinking that. It was just so early on, and I had
Hmm.
just found out. Mhm.
And so your sister, your twin was with you at the appointment.
It's a
John
little
wasn't
bit
there,
more.
right? Hmm?
Well, I was there. She wasn't there. She lives in Las
Yeah.
Vegas.
Oh,
But
okay, sorry.
the thing is, yeah, a lot of people don't get an ultrasound at 8 weeks when they're
Yeah.
pregnant. Yeah. So Nicole basically said, "I'm not leaving here till we do an ultrasound," because she was very excited about it. So that's how all this happened. Is that because typically you don't get that first ultrasound
Hmm.
for a little while later.
Yeah, I was
I
wondering why it
asked
was so
for one.
early. Pardon me?
Yeah, I asked for one. Mhm. We initially had gone to the doctor because I was going to demand they give me something to help me get pregnant because we had been trying for 2 whole months and I wasn't pregnant yet. And when the appointment came around, I didn't have to ask because I was already pregnant. So I was so excited to go and say, I'm pregnant and can I have an ultrasound? And they were very accommodating, probably
Hmm.
because of my age. So we found out that they were twins, and yeah, I was excited. I was really excited because I know what it's like to be born with a best friend
Yeah,
already there.
how cool is that? So you later find out though, unfortunately, that there is only one baby. And
Mhm,
the doctor suggested the panorama test, which is the NIPT. I think that's
mhm.
correct. And why was this suggested? Obviously, you shared that you were 43, but is that the reason why the doctor suggested that or?
Well, it wasn't the doctor. I think that it was the nurse that suggested that I do it, and I wanted to do it because I wanted to know the sex.
Okay.
But what the nurse didn't realize is that I had twins and then I
Mm,
didn't have twins anymore. So I wasn't supposed to do the test because the test can't like really tell the difference. Like if you still have DNA left over from a twin, a vanishing twin, or a twin that doesn't have a heartbeat anymore, the test can't tell the difference. And so the test came back with markers for Down syndrome, and it also came back that it was a boy.
hmm.
But they also told me that that could be wrong because there was DNA left over from the vanishing twin, is what they call that, at
Right.
11 weeks. Yeah, at 11 weeks, I had gone in and asked for another vaginal ultrasound, and there wasn't two heartbeats, there was only one.
Okay.
Mhm.
Wow.
So, yeah, and so to backtrack, at 11 weeks, there was only one heartbeat. And then I think you can do the NIP test at any time. And
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure we did it at my next appointment, didn't we?
I think so, yeah.
At my next appointment. And no one had documented, I think, that I
Mm.
previously had twins. So I had asked the nurse, "Oh, is there a test that I can do to find out the sex?" And she said yes. And so we did that test, and the results, no one was calling me, and the results were supposed to be back. And so I called the office, and they were acting really funny, like really weird.
Mm.
And it took me a week to, well, the doctor was on vacation and no one would give me the results. So I had to wait one whole week until the doctor got back from his vacation. And then I had an appointment with his wife because they were both OBGYNs.
Okay.
And then she was like, I'm sorry, we shouldn't have given you that test. And then from there, I didn't know what to think, but I was just happy that we still had a heartbeat.
Right. So there was some indication that your baby possibly has Down syndrome, but they couldn't tell for sure because of the vanishing twin syndrome. Is that correct?
Yeah, it could have been the one that didn't make it had the
Mm-hmm.
Down syndrome. So that's what we didn't know.
Mhm.
So then so subsequently, like, did you ever do an amnio?
No, that's the one we didn't want to do that because we already knew the sex of the baby and the
Mm-hmm.
risk associated with that. We just didn't feel like that was worth that chance that something bad could happen.
Yeah, the doctor suggested that we go to a geneticist and that we have a full ultrasound. And at the full ultrasound, that's when we found out definitely a boy.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctor that was doing
The 3D ultrasound?
yeah, the
Yeah.
3D, he was like, I don't see any markers for Down syndrome. You can do an amniocentesis if you want, clearer answers, but he didn't see anything concerning.
Yeah. I mean, they talked to us about what that means, and there
Yeah.
wasn't a part of us that said, "Oh, well, we don't want to keep going." That was the furthest thing from our mind. We just make sure everything looked good and
Mm-hmm.
healthy. Well, there's probably a 3% chance that he will have Down syndrome. Like when somebody tells you 3%, you're like, okay, great, and you think about it for a second, but then just go on.
Mm-hmm.
And as we went further down the pregnancy, even her OBGYN said, he's got a small femur, right? And we're like, okay, well, what does that mean? He said, well,
Mm-hmm.
he'll probably not play in the NBA. And we're like, okay, well, that's all we took with that. So we don't know if he knew more and he didn't want to tell us, or if he's just like, okay, yeah, this is something, but it doesn't mean really conclusively you have a son with Down syndrome.
He
Mm-hmm.
kept pushing us to do an amnio,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
but we never did. We didn't. I mean, the thought of Down syndrome was just a fleeting thought for me.
Mm-hmm.
When we went for the full ultrasound at 20 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a little stressful between 11 weeks and 20 weeks. It was stressful. I didn't know, if I was going to lose this baby also.
Mm-hmm.
But I just kept, trying to have a positive attitude and stay calm and take care of myself. And then 20 weeks arrives when we had the full ultrasound, and I was really nervous, and we went in and, they didn't find anything, and Down syndrome never crossed my mind again.
Wow. And I'm just curious because you said with the vanishing twin syndrome, if that's the correct term, could it, like, you said you did find out for sure at the 3D ultrasound that it was a boy, because could it have been mistaken as well? Could that be another like thing that they can't tell definitively from the NIPT test because of the vanishing twin? Would
Yes, because
okay.
there was
Yeah.
two DNA. There were
Okay.
two heartbeats, two sacs, or one sac. Well, I don't remember. I think there was two sacs.
I think there were two.
So there would have been two sets of DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So, between 11 and 20 weeks, I just thought, okay, well, we had a boy and something was wrong. And that's why, he didn't make it. And yeah.
And that is so interesting that you'd had, like, because John, you did blog a lot about the various ultrasounds. It sounded like you had quite a few, Nicole, and that even the 3D one, there were no indicators, although the short femur, though, is an indicator for Down syndrome. But I'm surprised that they didn't make any further suggestions, and they never suggested to do a NIPT test again or anything.
No, we never went down that path again. It didn't really talk about that.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, the short femur doctor didn't mention that until
Yeah.
36
Yeah.
weeks.
So maybe it was too soon to see how short it was, maybe.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, that kind of makes sense, I think. Yeah. And, as I was reading through all your blog posts, it was obvious how excited you both were to meet baby Finn. And, Nicole, you ended up having a C-section, and baby Finn is born. And what was it like meeting Finn for the first time?
Well, if we can roll back though,
Hmm.
there was the point of why the C-section had to happen, which was
Okay.
kind of interesting because we showed up in the evening, the night before he was born,
Hmm.
and Nicole, we met our nurse who was like a younger version of Nicole,
Hmm.
always focused on staying fit and working out. She said, "You know what? I want to get this baby out of me in an hour, right?" So they actually gave you something, right? I don't know what it was. And so what we didn't know is that his umbilical cord was just a fraction of the size that should have been.
Hmm.
And so it ended up in this really not so good situation where he was trying to come out, but the cord was not long enough. And they had to kind of like unwind the medication that they gave her.
Oh gosh.
And there was like there was no talk about a C-section or anything like that. And it was like early in the morning, the day he was born, they said, "Hey, the doctor's going to be here in an hour. You're going to have a C-section, and we're gonna deliver." I mean, there was no chance to even like think about it because she was so miserable,
Aw.
and I, for whatever reason, and I've never had a child, and so, but the room had to be so cold that I had a blanket over my head. And Cole like looked at me, she's just, it is not that cold, and I feel like my nose had like ice on it. It was so cold in that room because there's like a temperature. It was all the way over is how we had to do it. But anyway, so then we get into the delivery room, and this is my son is adopted from Guatemala, so I
Hmm.
didn't do any of this before in my life. So I come into the room, and I have a cooler because we're taking the placenta home with us because what do we do with it?
We dried the placenta and made capsules.
Yeah, okay, that's what we did. So I had a cooler, looked like I was like had a six pack. It was kind of funny. And so anyway, the interesting thing was, I'm sitting there with Nicole, and the anesthesiologist is close to us, and he's asking us what music to play, and it's really kind of cool. But you can hear the doctor and the two assistants. I think one was a nurse, and then someone else that was with him, and they're just like at work, right? And they're like
Hmm.
asking, "Hey, did you watch Grey's Anatomy last night? Yeah, do you believe that happened?" And they're just like talking about this, and then you hear like, "Oh, low set ears." It's like, okay, I heard that. I don't know what that means. You're like, was that on Grey's Anatomy? You just don't know because they're that's doing their thing.
Yeah.
And Nicole had to have an epidural, and so it's kind of wild because we have pictures of
Hmm.
right after when Finn was born that she's holding him and we're rolling back to the room, and she doesn't remember any of that happening because it was
Wow.
so at that point, we ended up having the C-section, or she did. I was just there with the cooler. And so the first time it's wild because you see that, I'm sure the same with you. You see your baby, and it's like 5 minutes ago the baby was inside of Nicole, and now the baby's out, and they're weighing the baby, and it's like he looks kind of like an alien a little bit, and they're trying to
Yeah.
like dry him up and stuff, and it's like okay, and I'm looking at the weight, I'm taking pictures, and then of course the weight's in not pounds, it's in some other number, and so I like had to tell him what it meant, and then they snuggle him up to us, and then now we have a baby. And at this point, we have a baby. We don't know that our baby has an extra chromosome.
Hmm.
And as we're there, they come in and do the hearing test, which I think is, normal that they test baby's hearing. And he did not pass that test. And they said, well, they don't always pass. You can do it later. And so you're wondering at this point, there's like this train of thought, like, okay, I'm pretty sure the OBGYN knew that Finn had Down syndrome when he saw him, but it's
Hmm.
not his job to tell us. It's not his call, right? And nobody at the hospital told us, but we're kind of glad because we feel like if they would have said that, then he would have been in the NICU and not with us because he didn't have any heart issues or really anything. He
Hmm.
couldn't latch on to breastfeed, but that was really the only issue.
Well,
And
he did.
yeah,
I just didn't give up.
oh yeah, he did latch on
Yeah.
definitely. And so then what was the whole great part about that was is he was with us the whole time, and
Hmm.
we didn't have to like let him go away and be in the NICU.
Oh, that's wonderful that you had that time with him before you're going to learn that he has Down syndrome. So how was that news delivered to you? Like, how much longer was it after he was born that you found out that he had Down syndrome, and how was it told to you?
Well, first you were doing some Googling, right? You want to talk about that?
Yeah. Well, John kept mentioning they kept saying low set ears. They
Yeah.
kept saying low set
And
ears.
the small femur thing. Why did they tell us that?
Why? And so we weren't in the hospital very long. We weren't even there for 48 hours.
Oh, wow. And you had a
Um,
C-section. Wow.
yeah, and yeah, I just wanted to go home and be with my baby. And yeah, by this time he was still having trouble latching on, but I did not give up. So just persevered through it until he learned how to do it. But when the first day when we got home, I Googled low set ears and gap between toes because I had noticed this huge gap between his big toe and his second toe on
Hmm.
both feet. And Down syndrome came up, and I was really tired. And I was like, well, I know he doesn't have Down syndrome. They would have told me. So looks like he has low set ears and some cute toes. And that's all we really thought. So 5 days later, we go to his well child visit,
Hmm.
yeah,
Right
with
there.
his primary care physician. And we go in, and I'm so proud. And I'm just can't wait to show my baby off. And she comes in and she asks us a few questions and says, "You know what? I'll be back." And John and I looked at each other and like, what? Where'd she go?
Maybe
Like,
she had to have a cigarette. We didn't know, right?
where, we didn't know where she went. So then you can,
Yeah, and then well, she did this thing where she like took his legs and like pushed them up into his chest and was like,
Hmm.
"Wow, why is that hurt? I don't even know." But then she came back. She said, "I'm pretty sure that your son was born with an extra chromosome. He has Down syndrome." And we're like, "Okay, so what do we do?" And we went to a hospital. It was in the same network as where we delivered, and so we went there and they tested his heart. They did so many tests. They took so
Hmm.
much blood. And there was really nothing wrong with him other than he has an extra chromosome, and that's really not a thing that's wrong with him. It's just who
Hmm.
he is. So you hear stories of babies being born with an extra chromosome and they're in the NICU, then they have to have heart surgery.
Hmm.
We didn't have any of that in our journey, which was we're so grateful and thankful for.
well, when she told us, we weren't surprised. We
Yeah,
didn't
yeah,
cry. We
no.
didn't say we weren't happy, but we didn't cry. I feel like watching Born This Way,
Mhm.
I was like, okay, well, my baby has Down syndrome, and I know in 20 years everything is going to be okay. So I'm not going to worry. I just knew it was all going to be okay. And so when she started saying, well, we have to look at his heart and we have to test his thyroid and what some other things that come with Down syndrome, and I I was like, oh my gosh, like I guess I should be worried about his health. Yeah, so that's basically what I was worried about, and that's all I've ever focused on from then on was learning all I could about how to keep him healthy and doing the best things for him. Little did I know that our life was about to change. We were like thrown into therapies and
Hmm.
doctor's appointments. The first year is a lot of doctor's appointments and evaluations, and then you start therapy at home, first steps, OT and PT, and I should mention that when Finney turned 1, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do baby-led weaning. He never would take a bottle, so he was exclusively breastfed. His whole first year, he would not take a bottle. And maybe that was because he just had trouble latching
Mm-hmm.
and he was used to, latching onto me, but maybe latching onto a bottle, I just didn't give it enough time. So John really lucked out because he got to sleep all the time. And I was so sleep deprived. I was a walking zombie. But then at 1, I wanted to do baby-led weaning, and come to find out, he did not know how to chew, and he couldn't even move his tongue to move the food, you know,
Mm-hmm.
laterally in your mouth. He couldn't. So we had a year of feeding therapy just for him to be able to learn how to eat an egg. One egg, it took a year.
Wow.
So, yeah, that was the beginning of me learning that everything comes in time and
Yeah.
you have to have patience. Like
Mm-hmm.
he will do it, but it will take time.
But so now when you think about it though, like the whole reason we wanted a child is because it went so fast, right? So it's still going fast. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe he's going to be 7 in the fall, but he's on a different trajectory. And so that I feel like we get extra time with him along this journey because the journey's not as fast paced as it was in our prior children, which is pretty good. Now, the thing we've realized since he's been going to school is he's a lot smarter and in tune with what's going on than he leads us to believe, and he
Mm-hmm.
knows how to like use that to his advantage. So like, he doesn't really feel like grabbing the fork and getting fed. Well, we'll feed you, you're our baby, let's help. But he's very capable of doing things on his own. And he's just smart enough to know when to like, yeah, just let them do it for me.
Oh, my daughter is very much the same way. So I totally hear you on that. I do find it interesting, though, that you were allowed to leave the hospital and nobody said anything to you about him having Down syndrome because, the heart, like, fortunately, he doesn't have any heart issues, but that is a huge concern in our kiddos. I mean, maybe they checked it. I don't know. I don't know if you know that, but I'm kind of stunned that you were allowed to leave without any mention of him having Down syndrome, that you had to wait 5 days till you went to your primary care doctor to learn of it. And it was almost like kind of a to the side. Oh yeah, he has Down syndrome, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I was surprised also because he did have a pediatrician assigned to him who came in. And later on, I asked my doctor, my OBGYN, I said, "Did you know he had Down syndrome?" And he shook his head, yes.
But are they not allowed to tell you? They are a doctor.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know. We just were left not knowing. I I I assume that the stigma of having a child with Down syndrome, associate the stigma associated with it, no one wanted to give us the quote unquote bad news. And so
Wow.
I'm glad they didn't give it to us. Because we did mention like he had trouble latching on, and
Hmm.
every time I breastfed him, I had to have the lactation consultant come and help me.
Hmm.
And I was so frustrated. But if they would have told me he has Down syndrome, I assume they would have said, "Oh, yeah, that's so common and so typical. You should just give him a bottle." So I'm glad I didn't know for many reasons, that one included, because I didn't give up, and
Hmm.
I didn't give him, formula. I breastfed him. And that was my plan, and that's what I wanted to do.
And that's so awesome that you were able to breastfeed him, because as I'm sure it's doesn't always happen for our kids. My daughter only did it a little bit. I would have loved to have been able to do it more exclusively. Just she just had super low tone, and turned out she had a really bad lip tie, which I didn't find out until she was 2.5. So the breastfeeding's long gone at that point. But so there was different obstacles in the way to make her successful, but I, kudos to you for persevering, because I love hearing the stories of other rockin' moms who have successfully breastfed their kids, because so many of us are told, like, just like probably what might have happened with you, oh, don't bother, or just give up because it's so hard, or they can't. Lots of moms even hear that they can't breastfeed, which is a total myth, as obviously but how wonderful that you were kind of, ignorance is bliss, I guess, in a good
Yes.
way there. And that you didn't know. So you kind of there was some inklings, I guess, throughout your pregnancy, but it sounds like it wasn't really much in the forethought, because I think that you said, John, that it was like a 3% chance that the baby would have
That's what
Down
they
syndrome.
told us.
Sorry?
That's what they told us was like, there's still a 3% chance. And, you know, if you give me three guesses to guess the number you're thinking between 1 and 100, I'm not going to guess, right? And so
Exactly.
that's the way I looked at it.
Yeah, I was the same way. My chances were higher. It was 6 to 9%. And I remember telling my sister-in-law that, and I said, someone's in that 6 to 9%. You just hope it's not you. And you're thinking, like, it's 91 to 94%. Like, those are awesome odds. So, you wouldn't even think about it. And 3%, you're going, oh yeah, no problem. We got this one in the bag. Yeah. So I think I know the answer to this question, but do you think it was better to get a birth diagnosis, or do you think you would have wanted to know prenatally?
I like how we found out.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. Yeah, I am a worrier. It would have driven me crazy. I just would have worried the whole pregnancy, and I'm glad that
Yeah.
we didn't know. The pregnancy was fun. It was hard to be pregnant at that age. It was surprisingly really difficult on my body,
Hmm.
but yeah, definitely. I liked, I, I, I liked that we didn't even find out until 5 days later.
And what was it like when the doctor told you that he had Down syndrome? Because obviously it was just all by physical characteristics. Doesn't sound like there was any karyotyping or blood test at that point. And like, it sounds to me like you were just, like you said, you were okay with it. You've had some, from watching Born This Way and the movie prior, you sounded like prepared. So, but I'm still curious as to what you felt in that moment.
I was just like, oh my gosh, I hope everything is okay. I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't worried about so much his future, but then when she was saying she was sending us off for all of these tests, I felt ignorant
Hmm.
because I didn't know. Of course, I didn't know. I hadn't researched anything about it.
Hmm.
So I didn't know what kind of problems, health problems he could have. But yeah, I think I was in shock.
Okay.
Even though we had suspected it, maybe partly the shock was because I was ignorant of the health problems that
Hmm.
came with the diagnosis,
Hmm.
or that can come with the diagnosis.
Yeah.
What about you?
No, I think it was the concern of, wow, I hope these tests turn out okay. And then when they did, it's like, okay, well, what does our road ahead look like, and how do we navigate that the best way? That's what you start focusing on next, because you can't take away that extra chromosome. And
Hmm.
we wouldn't want to. We just need to understand the best way to move forward. And Nicole has done so well with, the diet that Finn has, and just constantly looking for ways to give him a better chance with supplements and a good diet. And not, not to say that he doesn't get ice cream from time to time, but he doesn't have it every day. So
Hmm.
so it's and then he's just been an amazing kid. I mean, we are involved with our community. There's quite a few kids with an extra chromosome in our city. And Finn he's always does really well. I mean, we don't see a lot of challenges with him from, having any kind of issue with tantrums or anything like that. So
Hmm.
he's a wonderful, wonderful addition to our family for sure.
That is just so refreshing to hear because most of the people I've been talking to have not had that experience with their diagnosis, which is so heartbreaking to hear. You know, I've had two women that were told they could just leave their baby at the hospital, that they wouldn't be judged for leaving their baby who has Down syndrome. And that is within the last 10 years. We're not talking 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so that's so heartbreaking to hear that. But it's so nice to hear that your experience was not negative, that there was still filled with joy, that you had this beautiful baby, and that you could love on and see that he's going to be awesome. And how wonderful that that you guys got that. I'm so happy for you. That is so nice to hear those kinds of stories, because they're few and far between, unfortunately.
Well, on day 5, like I said, we went to the doctor, and then day 7, the karyotype came back. And the doctor called me right away. She said, well, he definitely has Down syndrome. So then we told all of our friends, and then, right away we started getting connected. One of our friends said, my friend just had a baby 2 weeks ago. So this was 2 weeks. So the baby was born 2 weeks after Finney. And she connected the other mom and myself, and we live in the same city.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So she was the first person that I met. So we have been friends ever since that day. And then our kids go to school. They're in the same class.
Oh,
And then we also met a mom, and her daughter came over that day.
And the daughter is actually in her 30s with Down syndrome.
oh, wow.
And so her mom was like, it's going to be okay, girl. Like, look right here. It's going to be okay. You're going to have so much fun. You're so blessed. And so it was just so nice to have so much support, like right out of the gate, right away when we found out. My mom, unexpectedly, she was like, you're so lucky. She told me I was so lucky. You're so lucky. She said, they're just so loving, and he's just going to love you. And that was not what I was expecting, because we had never been around anyone with special needs. And it wasn't a big deal to anyone. No one cried.
No.
Oh,
Everyone was happy for us because we were happy.
Yeah.
yeah, I think it makes a big difference when you set the tone and for how people to react. But how wonderful to hear such a positive diagnosis story. I think for most of us, it's hard to hear that news initially, but it's also how you deal with it, and getting through that grief period and figuring out what your life is going to look like. Like, I think it's fantastic. And John, I loved reading your blog and your testament of your love to one another, which is so wonderful. And yes, that you can still meet online and things can work. And, what advice would you give someone who has just learned either prenatally or at birth, like yourselves, that your child has Down syndrome?
Well, so the first thing that you have to make sure is the health of the child, right? So make sure that the tests are performed, and you have some expectation of what that means. But from just the whole stepping back to, wow, you have a baby with Down syndrome. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that you're still going to accomplish all the awesome things in life. You're still going to go to theme parks. You're still going to go to movies. You're still going to go to school events. You're going to go to a t-ball game. That trajectory is just not going to be the same, most likely, than what the neighbors' kids are going to be on. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to your child. They don't care. They're just loving life, and they're on their journey. And as long as you keep that in mind, you're going to just love it and have fun with it as well. It doesn't faze me that I'll pick up Finn and carry him because he's kind of tired and he's almost 7. I don't even look at what people are doing, if they're looking at me or not. I don't know. But I'm just being a dad and like trying to make sure this day is just as good as the last day, and we try to make the next day even better, right? So you just, it's no different. You're still a dad. He has an extra chromosome, and there's a lot more good that comes from that extra chromosome than bad, I guess.
Oh,
Oh, yeah. I would say my advice would just be to take a deep breath, and it's okay to be sad. It's okay to mourn, what you were expecting and you didn't get that. But just to take a deep breath and to realize like it's just all gonna be okay. Everything is gonna be okay. But you have to take it day by day. You cannot worry yourself with the future. I like to call it paralysis by analysis. You try to analyze everything. Am I doing okay? And what is the future going to bring? And should I think about this? And should I think about doing that? I learned, because I deal with anxiety and I have to calm my anxiety, I learned just to live day by day.
that's awesome. What do you think is one of the greatest things that Finn has taught you?
Comparison is the thief of joy. Yeah.
I can't top that.
He's taught, that is like the biggest thing he has taught me. I cannot compare, but he has also like taught me just to live in the moment. I was a big planner. It helped, like, because I have anxiety, planning everything, I felt like I was in control, and it gave me like less anxiety. I was less anxious. You cannot plan anything with a child with Down syndrome because it just doesn't go your way. It goes their way. It's on their timeline. So yeah, he's taught me patience, and I used to be very judgmental of other people, and oh my gosh, I am the least judgmental person ever. I just have the biggest heart because of him. I see life in a very different way, very fragile maybe, and loving. I just, he has just taught me how to love and how to just trust in the process and don't compare. Just don't compare him to other kids, or I will miss that moment of being very joyful for what I've been given and what he can do, and the small little things that he accomplishes. What about you?
No, I agree with what you're saying, and definitely, I still think of the what you said about being the thief of joy, right? So that's
Yeah. And I have to remind myself of that all the time. There are kids with Down syndrome that are going to Congress. There are adults with Down syndrome that are modeling, and I know that with us supporting Finn, he will reach his full potential. I don't know what that is, but I'm not worried about it. He'll lead us. He'll lead us.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes, because I'm walking the same dual diagnosis journey as you. And I love those words that you've shared. It's very meaningful because I do feel it's a little bit of a different trajectory as opposed to just Down syndrome. But, you know, yes, I love all those things that you said. And you're right, the comparison is the thief of joy. And I have to remind myself of that as well. I mean, my daughter's 11, so I'm a few years ahead of you, not much, but yeah, because that can be a real killer. And but to try to really live more in the moment, and I've been working on that as well, to just really live for this time now that we have. Is there anything else that you would like to share about Finn or your life with Finn?
Well, it's not really about Finn, but I think it's really important when you have that diagnosis to find your people, to
Hmm.
get on Facebook and join those groups and find the people around you that are parents with of children with Down syndrome. It's they are going to understand what you are going through.
Hmm.
And my friends with children that are typical children, they don't understand. And it's so important to have those friends that really understand what you're going through and have those connections so that you don't feel isolated. Like I said in the beginning, the word I
Hmm.
couldn't find. Yeah, is very isolating. And I found your podcast when Finney was around 3, and I
Aw.
was no way, there is a podcast just for me. I binged your podcast. I listened to every one of them.
Aw.
And so, yeah, thank you so much for letting us tell our story today, even though it was a little out of order. I'm maybe because I'm nervous or because both of us were talking, but thank you.
Oh, you're more than welcome. And I thought it was just fine. So that's so lovely to hear. And thank you for listening. I do appreciate that. And it was wonderful to chat with you both today.
Thank you so much.
You too.
You're welcome.
Wow, it was so lovely chatting with John and Nicole, and it was so obvious the love that they have for each other and their family. I found it so interesting to hear both of their perspective on their son's diagnosis. And it was so fun to hear about the whole lead up to them even getting pregnant, like going to the movie with Rory Shriek and how that shaped them into wanting to try to have a child and how they were even watching Born This Way long before Finn came along. It was like almost like a premonition, almost like preparing them for what was to come. Some of my takeaways, things that stood out to me. Number one, he's a lot smarter and in tune with what's going on than leads us to believe. And he knows how to use this to his advantage. Does this sound familiar? It sure did for me, because Ainsley is exactly this. And it made me think about how we hear often in our community, always presume competence. Number two, it's going to be okay, girl. Just look right here. You're going to have so much fun. You're so blessed. When I first got my diagnosis with Ainsley, I really needed to hear this. I'm sure we all need to hear it because for the majority of us, we're all embarking into unknown territory. It's a journey that we weren't expecting. And for most of us, one that we probably know little to nothing about. And number three, there's a lot more good that comes from that extra chromosome than bad. And I don't think doctors, when they're giving a prenatal diagnosis or even a at birth diagnosis, think about that. And I've heard it so many times. And I think we need to remember that there is a lot more good that comes from that extra chromosome. Yes, there's a lot of extra things like therapies and appointments and things like that. But for sure, there's a lot more good that comes with that extra chromosome. And number four, there was really nothing wrong with him other than he has an extra chromosome. And that's not really a thing that's wrong with him. It's just who he is. And I know for me, it kind of took me a while to kind of wrap my head around that, I remember reading about someone who said they don't, when they see their child, they don't fake Down syndrome anymore. And it took me a long time to get there. And I wondered when I read that, would that ever be the case? And it is now. I don't look at Ainsley, and I'm sure Nicole and John don't look at Finn and think Down syndrome. It's just a part of who they are. And I really loved what Nicole said. She said, I just have the biggest heart because of him. I see life in a very different way. And I can say that's the same for me. I look at life, I think, so much differently now with a child who is differently abled than I did before having her. And number 6, and we have to hear this often, and I think we have to remind ourselves about it, is comparison is the thief of joy. All our kids, they'll do their things in their own time. And I know for most of us in our community, when they get to those milestones, we celebrate big because they work so much harder to reach those milestones and to do those things that it is worth celebrating. And I know it's hard to not compare, even amongst the Down syndrome community, but all our kids are different. And I think it really takes away from how great our kids are. I hope you loved this episode as much as I did. And if you would like to hear more diagnosis stories or you want to share yours, let me know. You can leave me a message on my website at T21Mom.com or even a little voicemail if you wish. And I hope you all have been enjoying the summer, and our trip to Paris to the Olympics will be an upcoming episode. I have to say it was a pretty amazing and epic trip, and Ainsley, she blew my mind and did absolutely amazing. It would also really mean a lot to me if you left a little review about our podcast, as word of mouth is a powerful thing. So keep on loving on your rockin' kiddos, and I'll see you next time.